Hello. You
Hello.
well? Hi, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Not too bad. How are you?
Good. You had a good morning?
It's been good, thank you. Yeah, it's been quite busy, which is nice. Nice to kind of get off to a good start on a Monday morning. And I was saying to someone I was speaking to this morning, my 6-month-old baby finally slept through for the first night last night, so I'm feeling 100% rested. I'm probably fine fit for the first time in about 6 months.
Oh,
So,
shall I leave this with you?
yeah,
Lovely.
I'll
Wow.
see you later. Really, yeah.
Yeah, go have a good one. Oh,
How
lovely.
was your morning?
Good. I mean, I honestly thought it was Tuesday today when I was writing like a hello, welcome to LinkedIn. I was like, happy Tuesday. I was like, no, it's Monday. But no, really good. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. Um, I know we've done quite a few of these already. So if you have joined us before, you'll know these are quite an interactive session. So please do use the comments box available, ask any questions. Just as a show of hands before we kind of dive in, how many of you joining us today are already operating in the US market? Feel free to put a thumbs up, a clap, a celebrate emoji. And we'll run through kind of the key topics that we said we would in terms of the employment landscape in the US. So, in terms of what we'll specifically dive into, we'll look at worker classifications and worker types, US employment contracts, how they differ from UK contracts and what we're used to seeing, compensation packages, so what makes a good package in the US. And also, then we're just going to round off with just cultural differences. So, what we might see as just kind of standard practice here in the UK, what that looks like slightly differently in the US. But as I say, please jump in with any questions in the comments box. We will try and answer all of those or any of those that get answered. But yeah, I think we can kick off now. So, Will, I think you are very kindly going to kick off with worker classifications and just kind of employment types in the US market.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Maria. So, in terms of the US, one of the things that we always say to clients that we're speaking to is it really helps to almost don't try and apply your UK knowledge to the US. Really, almost just try and just think of it as a clean break and you're starting off from afresh from day one. And one of the key drivers of that is because the terminologies to stuff that are so different to what we're used to in the UK. And also the same terminology that might, even though be used, actually refers to a different thing in the US than the UK. And one of the things when it comes to different terminologies, it's really important to get your mind around and get your head around is worker classification and the different types of workers that you have in the US. And we're using the phrase workers because it applies to everyone. It's not just contractors, it's not just permanent workers, it's workers in general. And really what you've got is three main engagement models. So you've got W2, corp to corp, and 1099 as well. So they fall into two main kind of avenues is you've got employees and self-employment. So that the same way that in UK, that kind of makes a lot of sense. But obviously you can see there they're referred to as very different things. So just breaking it down first of all and looking at employment. So employee in the US is often referred to as a W2 or they are engaged as a W2. And the same way that in the UK, you've often referred to as PAYE if you're a contractor and you're an employee. It's not very creative again or original in the US. So PAYE, pay as you earn tax, which is why it's referred to as that. Someone who pays tax as they earn it in the UK. In the US, W2 is just a tax form that an employee fills out at the end of the tax year. So it's essentially just the same kind of title. That's where the name comes from. And W2 is just an employee. So you can be a contractor, you can be a permanent salaried worker. It just means that essentially you're employed. So you're on someone's payroll, someone is taxing you at source. So as you earn your funds, someone's paying the taxes and withholding those taxes on your behalf. You're insured by that business as well. The big thing in the US, which is very different to a UK employee, is that you're provided with benefits as well. And by benefits, we generally refer to medical insurance or medical benefits because there's no NHS in the US. So there's private healthcare insurance, but they do have some requirements that employees need to be offered. And one of that is medical insurance. So that needs to be provided to a worker, to an employee, a W-2. And there's also things like different states have different laws around things that need to be offered to employees. So one of those things that varies is often referred to as paid sick leave or PTO, depending on how you lump it all together, but paid sick leave. Some states have more days than others that employees need to be offered. Some states don't have any, so it'll vary. But those things that you would typically kind of associate with an employee is generally referred to as W-2. The other types that you've got, the other types of workers, are generally lumped together under the self-employment banner of independent contractors. And they fall into two main camps, really. So within independent contractors, obviously it's pretty self-explanatory. They're not employed, or they're not employed by another business, so that they're self-employed. They're an independent contractor. You've got corp to corp, or C2C, as you often see it written down. This is most likened to like a limited company contractor in the UK. So they would operate through an incorporation, or like an LLC is most commonly, as you'll see it in the US, rather than a limited company, obviously, which is the UK phrase. And then you've got 1099s as well. So 1099 is like a freelancer or a sole trader, that type of arrangement. So they're still an independent contractor, the same as a corp to corp. Both of them are still responsible for remitting their own taxes. So no one else is taxing them at source. They are paying their own taxes. They're providing themselves with their own benefits and insurances. The main difference between a corp to corp and a 1099 is a corp to corp is operating through like a business structure, like a corporate entity, and that sole trader is like a sole proprietor of their person. So they are, like we said, a true freelancer as well. And you'll probably only really find the corp to corps in your really, really niche contract roles, so your really high level senior workers. And then your 1099s, that's more in your true gig economy or really blue collar roles. So like day laborers in the construction industry, or in the gig economy, like a wedding photographer, those true freelance roles that just turn up to a site, do a few hours of work for one client, charge a specific flat rate and then never come back again, that type of work. So they're the three main workers that you've got.
Will, with the contract workforce in the US, how do you see kind of those three worker types kind of being divided up, with kind of the main buckets of contractors and where they sit in terms of their engagement?
You're probably going to find that about 75% of contractors in the US are W-2s. So the IRS and the Department of Labor are very much of the opinion that everyone is a W-2 by default, unless you can prove that you're not a W-2. And then you've probably got about 5 to 10% corp to corps, and then 15 to 20% 1099s as well. So like we said, the overwhelming majority you're going to find will be W-2. And the reason for that and the driver for that is obviously in the UK, most people listening, if they're based in the UK, will be familiar with IR35, the dreaded word that everybody hates. And if you're not a fan of IR35 in the US, you're really not going to like the equivalent of IR35 because it's about 10 years ahead of where it is. So there's a lot more case law in practice and it's been proven in the past. So it's a lot more embedded, it's a lot more mature than the IR35 legislation, and essentially it's a lot harder and stricter to navigate. And then also, as well as it being 10 years ahead in the US, because it's so big, the way that the country is governed is you've got the federal government, you've got state governments, and then local governments as well in some of your bigger markets. So there's federal legislation around IR35 in the US, there's state legislation around it as well. And so at a minimum, if you are classifying a worker, you have to do a federal assessment and a local state assessment as well. And there are 50 states. So there's basically 50 different iterations at least to IR35, the US.
That's simple.
Yeah. So we refer to it often as IR35 on steroids because it's about 10 years ahead, and then it's times by at least 50. Some states have as many as 6 different assessments in that state that have to be satisfied to classify someone as a corp to corp worker as well. So when we're talking about classification, we're typically talking about, is someone the equivalent of outside of IR35 or inside of IR35? So can they operate should they be operating as an employee? Are they doing the same role as lots of other people, or are they a true contractor? So the classification process is looking like you're assessing the working practices of a contractor specifically when it comes to classification. So for your perm roles, not necessarily something you need to worry about too much. It's more on contract, and is that contractor a true employee or are they a true contractor? And one of the big things to make sure that you are getting right when it comes to working classification is are you sure that the worker can be a corp to corp? Because in the UK, it's just the fee payer who makes that determination around the IR35 status. Whereas in the US, the entire supply chain carries equal responsibility. So you, as the agency, and your client as well. The person who, to be honest, carries the least responsibility in that is the contractor. So you will often have a contractor saying, I want to operate through my corporation. I want to operate down that corp to corp structure. But you need to realize as the agency, there are really increased risks to you. And so it's your decision as well to make sure that you're happy that that can go through that corp to corp structure. Because whereas in the UK, again, HMRC just want the backdated taxes. So say, for example, someone's outside of IR35, they should have been inside of IR35. We just want the tax back. That's the main thing. That's all HMRC really care about. In the US, it's the taxes. It's also the benefits. So we talk about benefits from day one as well for a W-2 employee that they should get. So if you've been operating it through a corp to corp, you're providing your own benefits to yourself. So that healthcare insurance, whereas an employee would have that provided for them. So that's backdated to the start of the assignment as well. So that's another cost. And then also one of the big ones is financial penalties as well. So businesses like Microsoft and Apple have been massively stung by engaging lots of workers through independent contractors that should have really been W-2s. And it's not necessarily the taxes or the benefits that have hurt them the most. It's the IRS and the Department of Labour really kind of take everyone to the cleaners in court, because that legislation is much harder to kind of, there's no grey areas around it as much. And so the financial penalties are massive when it comes to that. Not to mention the reputational damage that it does as well, if you've kind of got a big lawsuit and financial penalties coming out of you as well. So that's kind of the landscape, just scratching the surface. If it sounds complicated, wait until you get into the details.
Yeah. No, I think it'd be quite easy for us to spend kind of a full half an hour, if not hour, on this. But thank you. That is really clear. And I think it's fair to say that before you do kind of tap into the US market, especially when placing contractors, to really be aware of the kind of classifications and the risks if you are misclassifying workers. So we tend to always say, as a rule of thumb, go W-2 first whilst you're building your knowledge, building your contract book. And we can go into more detail as to why that's not only just a good business decision, but how you're going to mitigate your risks. But I think before we do spend the whole half an hour kind of touching on that, it would be worth us kind of just diving into employment offers, contracts, how they differ, what we see in the UK versus the differences in the US. What I would say is the kind of main one, and one of the key differences that shocks a lot of people that start operating in the US, is that all employment across all 50 states, so at a federal level, is at will. So at will employment. So that means that workers or employers can terminate the employment contract at any time without reason and without notice. And again, that works on both your perm and your contract engagement. So a lot of clients will actually see being asked to write in requested notice periods. So although employment is at will and legally there is nothing that will stand up in a court of law, a lot of clients or employers and employees will agree to a requested notice. And generally we see that kind of across all levels as a standard 2 weeks notice. So most employees will honour that, which is a massive difference when you think of the UK. Like we think, 4 weeks notice is kind of standard. And then the higher you get in terms of your level can go as high as, for those really senior kind of technical roles, up to kind of 4, 5, 6 months sometimes. So it is a far more transient market. So we do see that you'll work kind of a 2 week notice period, and then recruiters can get their invoices out the doors within kind of 2 weeks of placing those candidates. So it moves far quicker than what we see in the UK market.
Is that the same for like those senior roles in the US as well, Maria? So like, like a VP or like a, those type of roles, are they also like on those really short notice periods?
Yeah. So typically your employer and the employee can agree a requested notice. But I would say, as rule of thumb, like on average, we see those as 2 weeks. But I mean, again, it is requested. So if you wanted to request higher notice, you can, but it's not something we typically see going higher or kind of into those 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 16 weeks notice periods.
So you can really see the value then of a recruitment business there. If you've got a VP or, someone like, senior management leave after 2 weeks, that needs to be filled pretty quickly. So if you can do that, that probably leads to, much more value add from your side to that client. And it's a great in for you, but then also, those higher fees that we often talk about will be driven by that transient marketplace as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say that is kind of the biggest and one of the key differences between kind of employment contracts in the UK and the US. In terms of holiday, so PTO is a phrase, it actually stands for paid time off. Will and I always joke, since we've worked at PGC, I never say annual leave anymore. I'm like, oh, I'm on PTO. And everyone's like, what's PTO? But holiday entitlement in the US, there is actually, again, no legal requirement on a federal level for employers to offer PTO, so paid time off. Whereas in the UK, employees are legally entitled to their 5.5 weeks paid holiday, including those public holidays. In the US, an employer can literally decide how much PTO they give out to their employees. And that's actually including those federal holidays. Not all of those are legally required to be embedded into a PTO policy. What I would say is we see most of our clients will work off the New York Stock Exchange federal holidays. So for this year, that's 11 holidays. And then they'll add on anywhere between 10 to 15 vacation days or PTO days on top of that. But again, that is just such a stark difference in terms of what we see in the UK. We always joke as well that the US, they literally don't stop working. There's memes out there that says, oh, sorry, I'm just off having kind of a liver transplant. I'll answer your email within the next 60 minutes. So there's a much, and I will come on to culture, but in terms of cultural working styles, that the US hardly use all of their vacation days. I think there was a stat we read the other week that often they'll only end up using kind of half of their allowance each year. So it's really key that you're thinking about what makes a competitive package and what is the norm in the US, because going in with kind of 30 days PTO, your standard US employee is going to be like, that is a phenomenal PTO policy and package.
Yeah, definitely. And then just lead on to that as well, Maria, because sick pay actually leads into that PTO package in general, doesn't it? But then also because of people are less likely to take holiday pay, or not holiday pay, that less likely to take their holidays or their vacation days when they do have it. Paid sick leave does come into that as well, doesn't it, in the US?
Yes, that is a very good point. So again, in the UK, we are graced with a generous up to 28 weeks of sick pay via the PSL. In the US, it's at the employer's discretion whether employees can receive sick pay. And again, as you just said, it's dependent on the state that the employee is operating in. So, for example, you've got New York and parts of California that will require 7 days of sick leave. And one of the biggest differences as well on that is mat leave. So maternity leave. Federally, women are not entitled to any paid maternity leave. And it, again, is dictated state by state. So there's 8 states of which maternity leave will fall under your family leave laws. On paid sick leave, as you say, a lot of US employees will actually use this as holiday. Our commercial director, Clark, if you're listening, you shared a stat with us the other week that blew my mind, that said that 51% of sick leave that was taken wasn't actually for illness. It is used as annual leave or PTO policy. So again, just really being aware that the US is huge and it all changes state by state. And again, what the laws are around your paid sick leave in each of those states. And that's something PGC can do if you guys are thinking of placing internal workers for yourselves in the US, or you're just really wanting to get your head around what is a standard PTO policy, what does still paid sick leave look like in the US. We can do bespoke sessions on that on particular states as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a big cultural change as well, isn't it, Maria? Especially when it comes to contractors, because in the UK, for example, if you have a contractor call in sick, most people will be like, oh, I can't believe it, like we contractors called in sick. Whereas actually in the US, a lot of the time people are encouraged to take that sick leave as vacation day. Because especially if you're a contractor, like Maria said before, you don't actually have any legal requirement to be paid for any other type of leave unless you are in a state where they offer sick pay. So there's no holiday pay like there is in the UK when it comes to contracting still. And what in some states they do allow carryover. And so a lot of employers will want you to take that leave because they don't want to have to pay, either pay it at the end of the assignment or carry it over. And so you will find that it's actually a lot more accepted for someone to just say, oh, I'm taking a sick day today. They're not actually taking a sick day. They're just taking the day off. Like the day after Thanksgiving, if that's not often given as a sick day, then that as a paid time off, then that can be a sick day. Or the day after the Super Bowl is another popular one as well. So just days like that.
Sick days planned out well.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. Yeah. You plan them out. Yeah. Like you said, Marie, just to make sure, right, you've got 5, right? What are the days I'm going large on the day before? And then I'll make sure I've got one booked off for the day after.
But that is a really good point as well of how in the US you view kind of permanent and contract workers, because there's not that loyalty where you've got kind of statutory or discretionary within packages on the permanent side. We really do see a drive in contract workers because on the permanent side, if your employment's still at will, you've not got any legally required holidays or anything, you've got the same kind of loyalty with both your permanent and your contract role. So again, it does make for that super transient market. And I think we were speaking about this the other day, even when you talk of longevity in the US market, what we would see in the UK is looking at CVs and thinking, okay, 3-4 years, that's a good amount of time of the role. In the US, if you're, a year or more in a particular role, that is really seen as longevity. So it's just getting your head around those differences as well. And we'll come on to those with the cultural differences. Just last but not least on this point, and then we'll dive into kind of what makes a competitive salary, because I'm really conscious of time when I knew this was going to happen because you and I talk so much all the time. But just health insurance in the US. So obviously in the UK, we have got government healthcare. So we've got the NHS. In the US, there's actually no state-sponsored healthcare. So medical healthcare is completely privatized. And off the back of Obamacare, it meant that any workers, contract or perm, that work over 30 hours a week were legally required by their employer to be offered an employee-sponsored healthcare plan. And certain levels of that would need to be covered by the employer. Typically, it's about 50 or at least 50% of the cheapest plan available. Because of that, again, we see healthcare and medical healthcare contributions being a massive driver in terms of making an attractive offer, an attractive role, an attractive employer. So I think what we can come on to now is just what makes up a competitive compensation structure. And obviously the employment benefits contribution will be embedded within this.
That was a beautiful segue, Maria, into that.
I'm like, 20 minutes past.
So as Maria mentioned, in terms of what makes up a competitive compensation structure, you really have, again, quite a different viewpoint on a lot of things that in the UK that we typically associate with a good structure because of some of those key differences that Maria just mentioned there. So obviously the main one really is salary, as it always tends to be, but it's actually not as big of a driver in the US as it is in the UK. So just focusing on salary kind of to start off with on that. What you will find is that you can see here, basically, I think was it 50 West Marie did a study across basically how compensation models have changed over the last 12 months. And really, I think there has been a 71% increase across the board in salary rates. And also another cultural shift too there is that a lot of workers in the US will be expecting their salary to go up every year. And if it doesn't, then that can lead people to walk as well, because it's just kind of the accepted norm that should happen. So we're thinking about that as well if you're got hiring plans in the US. But that was by far the main way people were rethinking their compensation structures was that salary range. And you can see on screen here kind of an idea of maybe some base salaries. Obviously, you'll find that they will vary massively across the US, but a good idea of the different levels when it comes to base salaries there. Some other things that people have been using as a great way to attract and also retain talent as well, specifically in recruitment and sales roles, is kind of commission structures as well. So increasing the percentage of commission that can be earned from a specific deal, that went up about 13% last year as well. Another way, the kind of way that is not as common, but is becoming more and more common, is even sign-on bonuses as well. So 11% of businesses were looking at sign-on bonuses as a way to kind of attract and get people in. And then one of the main ones that Maria was talking about specifically before is benefits as well. So I think there's a stat that 46% of workers say that healthcare is the key defining factor on whether they choose a job in the first place or not. So you can imagine how important that is to a US worker. And so when you're putting together a US employment offer, it's not just a salary, it's not just commission, but it's a sales role you should be thinking about. And also those kind of PTO and those kind of paid time off policies, your healthcare insurance and 401ks, which is like a pension plan, which isn't required in the US like it is in the UK. So there's no workplace pension that's required. All of those things, so the actual looking after in the back office HR side of thing for a worker, because it's not kind of embedded in the culture like it is in the UK and governed by law, like with the NHS and with workplace pensions, people are becoming more and more and more and more bothered about their quality of care, rather than just the amount of money that they can earn too. So it's that holistic approach that is really growing in the last 3 or 4 years, we would definitely say.
Yeah, definitely. And just a point to come back on to commission structures. So obviously, if you guys are here watching this about the US, you would have heard of the huge salaries and the huge fees that can be generated in the US. A lot of our clients will come to us and say, Will, Maria, we're so generous with our compensation package already in the UK. If this is now going to kind of pivot to our consultants placing average fees of 30K, do we now need to reconsider compensation structures? So commission structures is something I always kind of keep my eyes and ears out, because I find it so interesting seeing different companies and how they structure that. So there are different ways. You've obviously got your standard percentage, a sliding scale, or we see more and more kind of dollar guarantees or drawbacks. So again, if that's anything that anyone on this call is exploring for internal recruiters, let us know and we can kind of dive into that in a little bit of a deeper dive. And obviously with your salaries as well, the salaries that we shared were recruiter specific. So we've also got fantastic resources in terms of tech salaries, finance salaries, marketing. So if you are looking at kind of benchmarking those salaries state by state, that's something we can look at. One thing I've just noticed we've not touched on is 401k. So 401k in the US is effectively a pension contribution. And again, there is no federal requirement. So none of the states are legally required as employers to offer an employee sponsored kind of match on their 401k. What we do tend to see is anywhere from kind of 3 to 4 up to kind of 5 or 6% employer match for your 401k contribution. But again, that is not federally required. So it's just something that you can add on and add to make your roles or your internal roles more attractive when it comes to packages and putting them together. I'm very conscious of time. So I think if we quickly touch on the cultural differences and what's kind of important to be aware of, I think just to quickly summarize all of those items we've spoken about, if you are new to the US, if you are operating in the US, I think it's really key that you and your consultants, whoever is picking up the phone to be speaking to clients or candidates, are very aware of these nuances so that you've immediately got that credibility and understanding of the questions you need to ask. But I'll let you kind of dive into your cultural differences.
Yeah, so just going back to what we said first, a really great approach for if you're doing business from the UK into the US is kind of forget what you expect someone to be asked or what you should ask people. Forget what you think they should know or that they are going to ask you. So in a big one is like take home pays in the UK. Everyone's used to doing that, especially in terms of contracting. And that's, again, just a bit of like not something that's talked about in the US at all. So little things like that is the culture is so different. You mentioned before, Maria, at-will notice periods. That's a massive one. So being aware that people can terminate and pick up your role within 2 weeks. So kind of when you're putting feelers out there, understand that things can just turn around really, really quickly. And then also you mentioned too, the kind of the hard work culture that US employees do have as well. So they're always at work. They don't take any time off. And so it is very much that kind of work culture. And people are very kind of involved in their work and passionate about their work as well. So being understanding that's a key driver for business, for employees in the States.
Well, I read something this morning actually on saying, obviously in the UK, we've got laws around how many hours you work, when you have a break, etc. Again, on a federal level, there's no legal requirement to give your employees any breaks, but actually some states have started installing, they call them meal breaks, which would be like your tea break or something. And again, that's something to be aware of, that each state will now decide as and when these meal breaks come into play, and just kind of shift that working culture.
Yeah, definitely. And then one of the big ones that I just wrap up with as well is about the communication style. So it's very direct in the US. In the UK, we're terrible for talking in flowery language and dancing around the problem and trying to dress it up. In the US, is very much just like very kind of no frills, just let's just talk openly and honestly, kind of get to the point, just drill down straight away. So yeah, again, when you're speaking with candidates and clients, kind of just be aware of that is that people might ask you a question that you'll be like, whoa, that was a bit forward. Or I wasn't expecting that to kind of go down that avenue, but it's not that they're being rude or that they are just kind of just get to the point. It's just the way that business is done in the US as well. So that's something to be aware of too. But yeah, like you said, Maria, we are very conscious of time. We've ran over and we didn't get through everything that we thought we would, which is classic us, like you said. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and Maria directly via LinkedIn. Just send us a message. I know we've had some questions, so apologies if we haven't had time to get through to that. But what we do have is we'll shortly be putting up a QR code and you can book in a call with me and Maria. So if you do have any questions about anything we've ran through today, anything that we haven't been able to touch on, or you're looking to find out more about the US and how you can get involved and recruit in the States, then please just scan the QR code, book in a call with Maria or myself, and we'd love to have a chat with you. But if not, thank you very much for joining, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.